The West is currently under the sway of many fallacies. Among those fallacies has been the more odious one that tries to paint expression as a virtue. You may have heard the words, "This is my truth," or "I am asserting my lived experience," or "You must respect my pronouns," or "respect my identity," or whatever. And you may have heard these terms used in a weaponized way by cultural activists, or you may have just heard them used generally by people in Gen Z who are basically, I think, the paragons and the vehicles for a lot of these ideas to move into society. But these notions, unfortunately, are based off of flawed thinking. They're based off of ignorance, and most importantly, and here is the most dangerous thing, they're based off of a false notion of virtue. And if we really want to understand just how our culture in the West, and especially in America, has become so degenerated, if we really want to understand the sources of some of our political problems, we must tackle this issue, because I argue that it is at the basis of so many of the problems and so many of the falsehoods we currently face in our culture. Before we get into all that much stuff, my friends, hello, I am Christian Watson, I am your host. If you enjoy political and social commentary from a philosophical lens, I must encourage you, please be sure to like, share, comment, subscribe, even if you disagree with me. This is not about having people who are the choir who are just going to sing my praises or anyone's praises. This is about engaging in the same process the American founders engaged in so many years ago, where they debated, and through debate they refined the mind, and by refining the mind, they established a free society. I want us to have a good, free society once more, and I want us to have a better, smarter kind of politics. So I would implore you, please, hit that subscribe button, hit that share button. If you want to be a little bit more generous, hit that notification bell. If you want to be even more generous, be sure to donate to me. I am just a 24-year-old man with no institutional support on this channel, trying to speak my mind about some of the things that I noticed, so I really appreciate any help that you guys can give me. Now on to the video. So, as I mentioned, fallacies, I think, are one of the biggest impediments to free debate and to the thinking of so many people in the West, because so many people in the West that are under the spell of fallacies can't think beyond them, especially when the fallacy is so personal to them that it is embedded in their own idea of expression. For example, the idea of having my truth, and this term has been around for a very, very long time, but it's gotten popular over the past 7 to 8 years. The idea of having your own personal truth as opposed to having the objective truth not only is just outwardly false, because if we had our own personal truths, we wouldn't be able to operate in life as we necessarily must. The very fact that I'm here speaking to you confirms several truths. It confirms the fact that I am a human being with a rational mind. That is a truth. It confirms the fact that there are processes within my physiology that produce sound. I have a voice box. That is a truth. These are truths that are not in dispute. The moment you begin saying my truth is the moment you begin trying to reduce truth to perspective. And when you confuse truth with perspective, that is when you go into some very dark territory. And yet, this idea has been used to justify several cultural and political issues. And it has almost been used to browbeat ordinary people into respecting them. For example, you may hear the idea of how a woman is the only individual or the only class of people who are able to talk about abortion, because women, in their own personal truths, with their own lived experiences, which is a downstream product of this idea, are the ones who would experience what it takes to have an abortion. Therefore, only women can talk about that. We had something similar. With this debate around white privilege. This idea was that only black people can say certain words because white people don't have the experiences that confer validity upon them via those words. This is another invocation of this idea of personal truth, so on and so forth. A more odious example of this is the trans children phenomenon. Now, this is going to be controversial, but I trust all of you are big boys and girls, and you can handle a little bit of spice that is delivered with respect. The trans children argument is that kids know themselves better than adults, and that it is imperative, this is oftentimes said by gender activists, that adults respect a child's form of self-expression. So in all of these examples I just listed to you, there is one principle at the core justifying them, and that is expression. The problem is, my friends, we have moralized expression. Expression being the justification for certain things is actually pretty unfortunate because expression itself justifies nothing. When you moralize something, you make it either good or bad. You assign a moral value to it, and people will respond differently towards that thing than if it was a neutral thing or a non-moral thing. And therefore, if you moralize an idea, and more importantly, if you moralize an idea that is so personal, like expression, it cannot be critiqued without, in part, critiquing the person who is connected with the idea, therefore adding a personal element to what should be an impersonal process. In other words, talking about ideas or talking about people are two different things. And yet, when you moralize expression, you talk about people and ideas in the same breath, and therefore, if you criticize or reject an idea, someone can say, you're criticizing or rejecting me. And this is the foul game that is played using this line of reasoning. Expression is like a car. A car can be used to go from point A to point B, or a car can be used to commit mass homicide, or it can be used to transport drugs that demean and demolish the value of the community, or it can be used to transport people you kidnapped, or it can be used to provide a rideshare service to people. Cars are morally neutral instruments that whose character is shaped by those who are behind the wheel of the driver's seat. Expression is the same thing. We have the ability to express good things, and we also have the ability to express bad things. But the moment we say that good and bad are a matter of perspective, and it's a matter of subjective interpretation, is the moment we blur the lines between those things, and there is now no objective standard by which to mediate expression. This is why I say that moral education is one of the chief problems here in the West, because so many different people believe it is virtuous to act in ways that are fundamentally non-virtuous because those ways are not confirmed by any kind of truth due to the reason those ways are confirmed by your own mere opinion. Remember this, principles are more important than your own mere opinion. And the Pride movement actually is really behind this as well. Because what the Pride movement did, Pride said that you being a certain sexuality puts an imperative upon you to express yourself in a manner that shows how free you are, that shows how liberated you are from the social systems that may have oppressed you. Well, the problem is you're conflating, again, a neutral thing with another neutral thing. You're conflating sexual orientation with the act of expression. You're assuming them to be one and the same. You're mixing categories, and then you're putting an imperative upon people not just to express certain things, but to accept it even if their deeply held beliefs go against it. And regardless of what you feel about all that kind of stuff, it's not a debate about sexuality, but more so it's just another example of how expression as a virtue corrodes our ability to actually confront issues and to live harmoniously in society, because it makes everything personal. And if everything is personal, if everything is subjective, then nothing can be verified beyond my own mere opinion. But in society today, we have this obsession with self-actualization, loving yourself, being kind to yourself. And while I believe self-love is an important principle in the abstract, and I'll probably make another video about this later, for maintaining a good society, because people that love themselves can therefore love other people, and they therefore understand what it takes to be in society. When you believe your self-actualization comes at the behest of other people catering to your whims, you're not actually engaging in self-actualization. You're engaging in hubris, which is why the entire idea of forcing people to accept your pronouns is not self-actualization. It is not respect. It is hubris, because you assume, number one, that your worth is built off of the opinions of someone else. That's number one. But number two, you also assume that you have the right in a civil society to demand intellectual obedience from somebody by way of force, by way of shaming, by way of bullying, and you don't do that in a good society. You do that in a society, in a context rather, where things are unequal and where slavery is being practiced. And in good societies, we don't practice slavery. We practice cooperation. If you see yourself through the lens that society tells you to express, this is the more fundamental point, you cannot truly know yourself. If society tells you you are this way or you are that way, if society tells you you should see yourself as a woman and fight the patriarchy, if society tells you you should see yourself as a trans person and do X, Y, Z and be gender anarchical, be queer or whatever, if society tells you you should see yourself as a black person who's suffering victimhood, if society tells you to do all this kind of stuff and you internalize that, you can no longer see yourself for who you are because you fundamentally don't know yourself. In order to operate, in order to have a good life, in order to operate in a context where other people are, you have to fundamentally know yourself. And we have a mass crisis of personal ignorance in Western society, which is allowing a lot of movements, especially on the political left, to rise up and take control of institutions, take control of minds, and win the narrative in the culture war. Ultimately, my friends, this comes down to this very simple issue. We have to understand that life and growth in life, these are processes. These are not absolute things. These are not things that go in a certain way. These are processes that do indeed conform to experience. But regardless of the process we go through, there are fundamental truths that must guide us as we go through life. And my expression is limited by the fact that I'm not going to be the same person I am right now in 2 years, or in 3 years, or in 4 years. I may have the same values, but I'm going to grow. I'm going to acquire something different. We should not encourage expression in our society. We should encourage refinement. We should encourage growth. Because in a society that encourages just mere expression, you're encouraging people to be captives, slaves to their current selves. And otherwise, you're encouraging people to degrade the quality of their life by refusing to march along that long path of human progress that puts us in the presence of greatness. Now, what are the political implications of this? I'm happy you asked. The political implications of this are very simple. When political issues get mixed in with personal tastes and personal problems, you can no longer distinguish what good policy is and what bad policy is. Because what good policy is and what bad policy is will be entirely dictated by the perspective, by the view of whoever it impacts. This is one of the main crises of politics in this country, in America. The government went from a 1776 vision of constitutional order, where the ideas and demands of the government were delineated and they were specified. And if they were to go beyond those ideas and those delineations, they would be called tyrannical. What did Thomas Jefferson say? Jefferson said that a system that lacks checks and balances, I'm paraphrasing here, one that lacks checks and balances is inherently a tyrannical system. Well, the entire point of checks and balances is not just that, for example, you get to correct other branches of the government within the government. It's also a principle that says there's limitations on what the government can do. But the moment those limitations are then crossed over and they go into the realm of personal expression is the moment there can truly be no limitation whatsoever. Think about a lot of the, again, I'll point back to this example because it's so good, a lot of the dialogue in the country around trans youth. It's fundamentally, according to people that support it, a matter of expression that children 7 years old, 8 years old, 9 years old might not be the sex that they are born as. It's a matter of expression. And so the argument for that policy becomes we have to protect children by letting them realize who they are, even though fundamentally that may not be who they are at all. In fact, it's not who they are because children don't know who they are, and who you are, there are parts of who you are that are set in stone. But using expression as a value says, forget about all that. It's about protecting the kids in our own way. It's about allowing them to be who they really want to be. Again, there are more examples of this, but I think I've belabored the point enough. We can't simply allow our own personal perceptions to be the guide of policy, nor to be the guide of how we live our lives. We ought to let first principles, we ought to let good conduct, we ought to let those kinds of things guide us. And so for that reason, my friends, it's important that we do not treat expression as a virtue. We instead find the good things to express. We find virtuous things to express. And we use those as a framework to build a good society. Because otherwise, we'll all just be prisoners of our own delusions, trapped within prisons of our own making, incapable of correction or revision, and fundamentally incapable of living life as a full human being that is destined to grow, learn, and prosper. My friends, like, share, comment, subscribe, do whatever you can to get this channel successful. I love you guys so much. Study history, study philosophy, remain morally convicted, and please stay pensive.